Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're heading straight into some seriously dark territory, exploring a truly intense and tragic moment in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Sounds intense.
It is, and you've chosen chapter 23, a chapter that deals with the immediate aftermath of a truly devastating event for Victor Frankenstein.
Yeah.
And well, our mission today is to really understand, try to get under the skin of his raw emotional state as he sort of unravels, and then, the desperate actions that he takes.
Yeah. I think you picked a really pivotal chapter because we're looking at Victor's own account of discovering Elizabeth's murder. So this gives us an incredibly intimate, though potentially biased look, right, into his psychological landscape at this horrific juncture.
Right, and it's not just about kind of summarizing the plot, right? But what I really want to understand, I think what would be interesting for our listeners too, is that raw essence of grief, right? That kind of almost unbearable rage that can take hold. And then, that fundamental human desire for justice, or maybe, as we'll see, something a little bit darker, revenge, as Victor experiences it. And, what can this extreme situation actually reveal to us about human nature itself and the consequence of obsession? Like, what happens when we become so fixated on something that it consumes us?
Right.
Okay, so let's unpack this. So, where do we even begin?
Well, I think we begin with the scene itself. It's set in an inn, a place that should offer respite, right? And Victor even describes the areas surrounding the inn as this lovely scene of waters, woods, and mountains. But even within this initial tranquility, there's the sense of foreboding that creeps in. And consider how the natural world itself seems to mirror Victor's inner turmoil. The wind suddenly rises with violence. And the moon, which had reached its zenith, begins to descend and is obscured by these fast-moving clouds. It's almost as if nature itself is providing this grim prelude to the horror that's about to unfold.
Right. So there's this real sense of nature reflecting this kind of inner chaos. And Victor, even before the discovery, is on edge, right?
Nope.
He mentions feeling calm during the daylight hours. But as soon as night falls, 1,000 fears arose in my mind. Can you imagine that? It's constant anxiety, right?
Yeah.
Like he's clutching a pistol, concealed, terrified by every sound, yet also determined to fight to the death. And you can really, I think, feel that palpable sense of dread that he's experiencing and that agonizing anticipation of the monster's return.
And what's fascinating here is his interaction with Elizabeth. I mean, she's witnessing his agitation, what she describes as his timid and fearful silence, which she finally breaks with a very direct question.
Yeah.
She asks him, "What is it that agitates you, my dear Victor? What is it you fear?" And her question, right, stems from this deep love and concern, but it also tragically highlights the growing gulf between them that's really a consequence of Victor's secret and his all-consuming obsession. His evasive answer, that he'll ensure her safety after this one night of dread, just builds the tension for us as readers and, well, seals Elizabeth's tragic fate.
Right. And so Elizabeth, seeking the supposed safety of her room, retires for the night, while Victor, completely consumed by his fear and the self-imposed duty to protect her, tries to secure the area. He's desperately searching for any sign of the monster, but, he finds nothing. And there's this fleeting moment, isn't there, where he almost allows himself to believe that, maybe his fears were unfounded.
Right. But that fragile hope, that brief moment of potential relief, is brutally shattered by what Shelley describes as a shrill and dreadful scream.
Yeah.
And think about the visceral impact of such a sound. The text actually emphasizes how it affects Victor physically. He says, "The whole truth rushed into my mind. My arms dropped. The motion of every muscle and fiber was suspended." It's this moment of complete paralysis, right, in both body and mind, followed by this chilling, undeniable realization of what has occurred.
And then comes the absolutely horrifying discovery, right?
Yeah.
The description of Elizabeth's body is so stark and brutal.
Yeah.
She's lifeless and inanimate, thrown across the bed, her features pale and distorted, bearing the, quote, murderous mark of the fiend's grasp.
Yeah.
It's a devastating image. Just, try to imagine that scene. And Victor's reaction is just this utter overwhelming grief and a desperate longing for his own death. He cries out, "Could I behold this and live?"
Yeah.
And it really underscores the profound depth of his love for Elizabeth and the unbearable weight of this catastrophic loss.
But even within this moment of intense personal agony, Shelley layers in yet another level of horror. So Victor looks up and he sees the monster at the open window.
Oh, gosh.
That grin, the deliberate pointing a finger towards Elizabeth's lifeless body. It's just this calculated act of taunting, a cruel display of his power, and Victor's utter helplessness in this moment.
It's just so awful.
It is.
And Victor's immediate primal reaction is to fire the pistol at the monster. And it's clearly a response fueled by pure rage and utter despair. But the monster, as he always seems to, eludes Victor. He leaps into the lake with incredible speed, almost supernatural speed, and the subsequent pursuit by the inn's inhabitants is ultimately futile. And what's perhaps even more demoralizing for Victor is that many of them dismiss it as a product of his overwrought imagination.
Right.
So he's left completely alone once again with this unbearable grief and the undeniable horrifying reality of the monster's existence and his terrifying cruelty.
And so, following this absolutely horrific night, we witness Victor's complete physical and mental collapse. I mean, he is so utterly broken that he's unable to even participate in the search for the monster. His body seems to mirror his shattered psyche. He describes feeling like those of a drunken man and ultimately succumbs to a state of utter exhaustion and fever. It's a powerful depiction of how extreme trauma can completely incapacitate an individual. I mean, have you ever experienced a moment of such profound shock that your body simply refused to function?
I can't even imagine. It's a chilling thought. But, even in this almost unconscious state, some instinct draws him back to Elizabeth's body.
Right.
And he recounts the scene, noting that she has been moved, but the lingering, deadly languor and coldness of the limbs just brings the crushing reality of her death crashing down upon him all over again. It's, the text really emphasizes the absolute finality of it. The person he loved, the hope for his future, utterly gone.
What's particularly significant here is how Victor's mind starts to race, connecting this present tragedy to the previous ones. William, Justine, Clerval. It's like this cascading wave of guilt and sorrow washing over him. He's not just grieving Elizabeth, he's carrying the immense weight of all the lives he believes he's responsible for. And then his immediate fear shifts to his remaining family, his father and Ernest, underscoring the ongoing threat posed by the monster.
And this overwhelming fear for his father and Ernest is what drives his desperate decision to return to Geneva. Right?
Yeah.
But the journey itself is so arduous. It's almost as if the physical world is mirroring his internal suffering, the unfavorable weather conditions, his profound physical inability, despite, in the past, finding relief from exertion. Yeah. It all really underscores the deep and pervasive impact of his grief. And he's haunted by these vivid memories of happier times spent with Elizabeth. And that stark contrast only amplifies his current misery.
Yeah.
It really brings home that point about how sudden, catastrophic change can completely devastate a person.
Absolutely. And so he finally arrives in Geneva, and he finds his father and Ernest physically unharmed. But the devastating news of Elizabeth's murder has this catastrophic effect on his already fragile father. The description of his father's rapid decline is just heartbreaking, his eyes losing their light, his complete inability to cope with such profound and repeated loss. And then tragically, his father dies in Victor's arms. I mean, just think about the cumulative impact of these losses on Victor. It's almost too much to bear.
It's just, it's unimaginable. And this final crushing blow pushes Victor beyond his breaking point.
Right.
He experiences this complete mental breakdown, losing all sensation, finding himself imprisoned in this suffocating darkness of his own mind. The narrative tells us that he was considered mad by those around him, and he spent months in solitary confinement. It's a descent into utter, unimaginable despair.
But within this profound darkness, something fundamental shifts within him. As he slowly, painstakingly begins to regain some semblance of sanity, that all-consuming despair gradually gives way to a new, equally powerful force, the awakening of an all-consuming desire for revenge. The vivid memory of all his misfortunes fuels this maddening rage directed entirely at the monster, the creature he brought into existence. This is a crucial turning point, isn't it? Where grief transforms into the singular obsessive purpose.
Absolutely. And this single-minded focus leads him to seek help, or perhaps more accurately, justice, from the magistrate. He approaches him with this newfound, determined resolve, recounting this horrific chain of events and vehemently demanding the monster's immediate apprehension. He's laying out what he believes to be the absolute truth, expecting the magistrate to take swift action.
And the magistrate's initial reaction is understandable incredulity.
Yeah.
I mean, Victor's tale, this almost unbelievable story of a superhuman monster operating outside the bounds of nature, is just beyond the realm of normal human experience. However, As Victor persists with his desperate narration, the magistrate becomes increasingly attentive, even visibly shuddering with horror at the gravity of the events described. There's this inherent conflict between the fantastical nature of Victor's account and the undeniable, palpable distress of the person recounting it.
But when Victor demands immediate action, the magistrate's skepticism comes to the forefront, right?
Of course.
And he raises practical and perhaps very reasonable concerns, like the monster's apparent superhuman abilities, the significant amount of time that has already passed since the initial crimes. It really highlights the inherent limitations of human law and established authority when confronted with something that seems to defy the natural order, human comprehension. What would you do in the magistrate's position?
Oh, that's a tough one. It's really hard to say.
Right. Like faced with such an outlandish claim.
Yeah, because
It really makes you think.
it does.
Okay, so Victor, completely consumed and fueled by his burning rage and grief, he just dismisses these practical concerns with contempt. He firmly believes that the monster is still nearby, still a tangible threat, and he becomes increasingly frustrated and enraged by the magistrate's perceived inaction. He interprets it not as reasoned skepticism, but as a fundamental lack of belief in his horrific story and a complete failure to deliver any semblance of justice for his murdered loved ones.
And it's in this intense moment of frustration and despair that Victor makes a truly stark and revealing declaration. He openly admits that revenge has become his, quote, devouring and only passion. And the magistrate, witnessing this intense, singular, all-consuming focus, understandably perceives it as further confirmation of Victor's complete and utter madness.
Ow.
It's a tragic irony, isn't it? Victor believes he's finally found clarity and purpose in his life, but to the rational mind, it appears to be nothing more than a dangerous descent into utter obsession.
It is. It's such a tragic irony. And the chapter concludes with Victor's defiant and angry departure, his bitter words underscoring this now vast chasm between his desperate, all-consuming need for vengeance and the inherent constraints of societal structures of human belief. He's completely and utterly alone in his relentless pursuit.
Yeah.
So, as we reflect on this intense chapter, what are the key things for us to take away? I mean, we've witnessed this devastating and rapid plunge into the deepest depths of grief and the almost inevitable and perhaps terrifying birth of this all-consuming need for revenge within Victor. And we can see with such stark clarity how the brutal loss of Elizabeth, this final horrific act, serves as the ultimate and irreversible catalyst for his complete and tragic transformation. This chapter really drives home those core, enduring themes of Shelley's masterpiece. That crushing and inescapable weight of responsibility, the unforeseen and utterly terrible consequences that can arise from even the most ambitious creations, and the sheer destructive power of unchecked and all-consuming raw emotion.
And you know, what's particularly intriguing to consider is the magistrate's reaction to Victor's desperate pleas. Is it merely simple disbelief in the face of what appears to be an utterly unbelievable story? Or is there a more pragmatic, perhaps even weary, assessment of the limitations of his own authority and the resources available to him? What does his response ultimately tell us about the inherent limitations of human authority and the legal system itself when confronted with something that fundamentally defies the natural order and human understanding? I mean, it raises this profound question about how any society can effectively respond to the truly extraordinary and terrifying.
Right, and that leads us to our final and perhaps unsettling thought for you to consider long after we're done here today. Victor ultimately chooses revenge as his sole remaining purpose in life. But in such extreme and unimaginable circumstances, is revenge ever truly justifiable? Or is it an inherently destructive path that inevitably leads to further tragedy and suffering? Were there any other paths, however faint or unimaginable to Victor in his grief, still potentially open to him at this critical juncture? Or was he already irrevocably trapped in a self-destructive cycle entirely of his own making?
That's something to think about.
It is. It's a truly chilling question.
It is.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today. Join us next time when we'll be exploring
The ethical implications of